There was only 1 year in my life that I spent living in a major metropolitan area, and that happened to be Vienna, Austria. And while I was living there, because I was a backpacking vagabond without a car, I naturally became very familiar with the public transportation system. And of course, on top of that, Vienna purportedly has the most advanced public transportation system in the world. So, one of the things I noticed while I was living there and using the public transportation so often, and this might be the case in every major metropolitan area in the Western world, again, this is the only one I ever lived in, is there's often people in same color shirts, whether, they're purple or yellow or green or blue or whatever, and clipboards that want to ask you for money for some NGO, Doctors Without Borders or Greenpeace or Amnesty International or whatever. So, I was going to the subway one day in Vienna, Austria, and Greenpeace is there. And I'm like, fuck, all this stuff's going through my head. And they get me. This cute, short little girl gets me, and I'm like, crap. And I can't even pull the, I'm a foreigner and I don't speak any German thing because they all speak English. And I'm like, okay, we're talking to this Austrian girl from Greenpeace about what is it that you want. And she's like, oh, I'm in Greenpeace and we want to save this, we want to save that, and the planet's great and all this other sort of stuff. And I'm waiting for it. I'm like, okay, how much money do you want? And she's like, oh, if you sign your name here and you can give us a donation and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, I don't want to give you a donation. Oh, why don't you want to give us a donation? And I said, because I think Greenpeace is a stupid organization. And he's like, well, why do you think that? And I'm like, well, because, first of all, I think the global warming thing is a load of crock. And I think you guys are a bunch of socialists with a green bandana around your head. You're watermelons. And she's like, oh, wow. Well, maybe you could just give me your name and your email address and we could email you and you could be on our email system. And I'm like, no, I don't want to give you my email address. I mean, you have my first name. My first name's Dylan, but that's all you get. No email address. And while this is going on, I'm hoping that, like, the girl eventually realizes that she's spending more time with me than she could be spending on someone who might actually give her €5 and letting me go on the subway. When this guy comes over who looks as stereotypical Greenpeace as I could possibly imagine. I just particularly remember his hair, this like long, shaggy, unkempt hair, and this long, shaggy, unkempt beard, and he's this really tall guy, and he came right over, really, I was going to say assertively, but that's being a little too kind, aggressively, and he's like, what's the deal? And she's like, oh, here's this guy, and this is Dylan, and I'm trying to tell him that he should get involved. He's like, oh yeah, you should get involved. And I'm like, fuck, I've got to deal with two of them now. He kind of gave me the same speech. You should join it because of this, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. And I'm like, look, I'm not giving Greenpeace any money because I don't like the organization. And he's like, oh, why don't you like it? And we got in some tit for tat about global warming this or nuclear energy that or that save the whales, whatever, or whatever. And I'm like, look, man, I don't agree with your organization. I don't want to give you any money. And I don't want to give you my email address. Go away. I'm going to the subway. And he starts throwing these weird guilt trips at me where he's like, look, if you think Greenpeace is bad, that means you need to join so you can write us a letter and contribute on how to improve. And I'm thinking, where did this self-righteousness come from? Of all the organizations on Earth, I don't have time to join them all and write them letters and get them how to improve. No. And we went back and forth a little bit on this too. And finally, I think he was pulling the ultimatum clause sales tactic. He goes, look, you've got two options. And I'm going, whoa, now you have two options? You got two options. You can either join and donate some money, or you could join and write us a letter. And I'm like, no. I choose option number 3, dude. I give you nothing, and I get on the subway. And I remember he was kind of shocked. And I think Viennese people are kind of, and Austrians in general, while they have a tendency to be assholes, at the same time, I think they have a tendency to not really want to disagree with other people. And I think he wasn't used to that sort of blunt Americanism. Several Europeans pointed that out to me while I was there. It was very blunt. And I remember when I finally got on the subway and I took it to go home, thinking about this guy, and I'm like, this guy completely 100% fit every single stereotype that I have about Greenpeace people, which is they talk up and down all day about saving the environment, but in reality, all they want to do is tell you what to do. So this is an example of what I'm calling the forced dichotomy, where you give the person two options that they're able to do, where both of them is a win for you and him be damned. The reason I wanted to tell that story was, first of all, because it was so obvious what this guy was doing, and segue that into some examples that might not be so obvious. And I'm going to pull from some YouTube comments again, because I naturally, as I keep making more YouTube videos, I get more and more flack in the form of YouTube comments. And then we could also look at potentially some different ways of dealing with it that isn't buying the person's bullshit. So let's look at the first one. Now, this first example comes from a video I did on economics with a friend of mine, Nima Major, who runs economicsjunkie.com. And on these economics videos, it's very, very common to get into shit show fact fight contests, because the topic is very hot and is obviously very, very connected to politics. So I'm not shocked that someone left me a very controversial message, and I don't want to get into the details of the actual economics itself. That's not the point of the video. But the point of discussion here is, it looks like a correctly done argument, where at first he says, I'm claiming X, that libertarians believe that gold is money, and the fact that gold today is not money is the fact that the government is counterfeiting it. He says, no, that's wrong. The libertarian view is this other thing. And okay, that's great, and we can have a discussion on that and actually welcome that. That's part of the reason I'm creating the videos. But then he throws this thing out here. He says, unfortunately, the failure to understand this view here has led to a wasted and spurious discussion. He's leading with insults before having any chance to interact with me. So what I wanted to do was to create some sort of back and forth that was actually a productive discussion, and see if we could pull us out of this thing where we're just going to, lead by insults, or at least lead in the first comment by insults. And I asked him, what's the empirical evidence of the argument that you're making? And again, I don't want to make this about economics, but you need to understand where this is coming from. Is that one of the criticisms that I have of the libertarian view of economics is that they don't rely on empirical evidence. And I feel like if you're going to have any sort of science at all, you have to rely on empirical evidence. So I ask him this, what's the empirical evidence? And he writes back to me, by virtue of the fact that it takes more dollars to buy the same thing today than it did 5, 10, or 25 years ago. Do you think inflation magically imposes itself apart from the size of a country's issued currency? Here is our forced dichotomy. Do you see this? So he gives this explanation, which is the first sentence. He says the reason, here's the empirical evidence, is that it takes more dollars to buy the same thing today than it did in the past. But then he asks me, do you think inflation is magic, or is it due to the size of the currency pool? This is the same thing that Greenpeace guy was saying. As he said, you had two options for what to do. And in this case, this guy is saying, you have two options to explain yourself, boy. You either agree with me about my interpretation of inflation, or you say that it happens by magic, which of course, in this case, he means nonsense. So essentially what he's saying is, agree with me or you're stupid. Now, do you guys see here why this is no longer a discussion about economics? If it were a discussion about economics, the question would have been, okay, here's my empirical evidence. How do you explain the price difference? Now we're actually having a discussion where we can go back and forth and say, okay, well, it's this because of this reason, or it's that because of that reason, and hopefully we can slowly carve away at the stone of truth and get the statue underneath that we're looking for. Michelangelo reference for any of those who caught that. But no, what he's doing is he's forcing me into a corner by saying, you must choose one of these two things, and one of them you agree with me, which I win, and the other one you admit that you're an idiot, which I win. I had a strong suspicion that this is what I was going to be walking into when I responded to this guy in this way. And I did it anyway because I authentically want to create a conversation with this guy. The reason I make these economics videos is because I had a very similar economic viewpoint to something like this. And I got some new information and I got some new arguments and I changed my mind. And part of the reason for making these videos is to engage people like this to get a chance to create a conversation. So what I wanted to do was see if I could point out what he was doing in a way that was non-confrontational and see if I could show him that he's only giving me two options in order to explain myself, and that, we're not going to be able to have a discussion if that's what he's doing to me. So here's what I wrote. So my only two options to explain inflation are money supply and magic. Again, I'm really trying to emphasize is what you told me is I'm only allowed to answer you in this way. And this is what he says. Have you seen how many bolivars it takes to buy a loaf of bread in Venezuela lately as opposed to 5 years ago? So, again, he's going back into the economics thing. He's trying to go tit for tat for the economics, where I'm trying to discuss the method of the interaction. So either he's missing what I'm saying or he's deliberately ignoring it. So I try again. I said, absolutely, because it's not some grand mystery that there's inflation going on in Venezuela lately. I said, and are you saying that my only two options to explain that, the inflation in Venezuela, are money supply and magic? Again, super duper emphasizing that you are only giving me two options to explain myself. I want to have a conversation with you, but I can't if you're going to force my responses. Now, I get a response, still him talking about economics. I'm not going to read it. If you want to pause and read it yourself, you can see it. He contradicts himself in a few parts, and it's honestly, I don't think he literally didn't understand what I was trying to point out to him. So in my response after that, I took some time to point out some of the contradictions that he just made, and that very specifically I said, look, if you want me to take your comments and questions seriously, you need to not manipulate my answers before I give them by giving me two predetermined outs to explain myself, hence my repeated questions on money supply and magic. I'm still trying to have a conversation with this guy, and I'm like, look, let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you why I kept asking you the same question that I did and kept ignoring the economic questions. So how does he respond to that? I'm sorry, but you really thought I was taking you seriously? The magic quip was aimed at MMT, i.e. the goofy views in your video. But my last reply to you was consistent in how the increase in the money supply translates to inflation, not three other options, in quotes, just a single option, and the way it transmutes through unbacked domestic and international fiat currencies. While I don't think you're this obtuse, I also don't care how you take my comments, and frankly, you didn't even really read them. So, best to you. Wow. So we see that my avoidance to directly discuss economics was exactly the right choice, because now that I questioned him and specifically pointed out and used the word manipulation, like, dude, you're manipulating me through this, he becomes openly hostile, straight up says, oh my god, you thought I was taking you seriously, you little peon, which of course is very dominate, submit language, right? Now, I hope you guys see why this was never actually a discussion, because he held this in his back pocket the whole time, which is if he didn't like what I was saying, that he would dismiss me as someone that's not worth taking seriously. This is a perfect example. I could have spent my time arguing tit for tat, trying to say this about economics or that about the currency or this about inflation or blah, 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 blah. Would have been a complete waste of time because this guy was only interested in fighting with me. when it looked like we were having a discussion about what was going on with inflation, what in reality he was doing is he was controlling my responses. Now, this next one, though, I know I said at the beginning that both of these weren't going to be that obvious, but now that I look at this one's going to be obvious on par with the Greenpeace guy. So it's just too funny not to show you. So let me show it to you. So I apologize again. This is another comment on another economics video, and it was an interview with Warren Mosler, who's like the top MMT guy, and me and Nima were able to have him on, and it was awesome, and he was talking about the way that the government creates money, and like the actual process of when a bill gets signed and when somebody runs a piece of paper from the Federal Reserve to the U.S. Treasury or whatever it was. You can go watch it if you want the details. But I get written this, which is 100% of what passes as the creation of money as taught in our universities and government is convoluted and exactly 180 off from what it should be. And so far I'm like, yeah, that's what we're saying. And he goes, but cognitive dissonance is experienced like people like yourself. And I'm like, me? Man, I thought we were agreeing on something, dude. What? But cognitive dissonance is experienced by people like yourself that attempt to understand what is going on. I'm just attempting, sir. Oh, I'm not enlightened enough to understand past my attempt. We are all slaves, owned by the international banking cabal that is headed by an unknown group of individuals. Very few people actually know / understand what is actually happening, and I have never found another besides myself, though I assume others know too. Whoa, dude. Fucking some deity from the 8th dimension came down to grace me with his presence on this one, man. Whoa. My first thought was he was going to make a comment, like when I'm reading through the first half of the first sentence, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of what we're talking about, that the way it works is nothing like the way the people think it works. And then the cognitive dissonance experienced by people like yourself. And I'm thinking, did this guy even watch the video? Normally I wouldn't respond to something like this, but I've been reading that the more you respond to people's comments and the more they respond back to it, the more your YouTube rankings go up. And I'm like, all right, I'll interact with the people who are commenting on my videos because I'm a small guy and I want to be a bigger guy. So I asked him, did you watch the video? And he responds, so your question shows me that you're either insulting me or you're incapable of critical thinking. So which one is it? I think we can classify this one as a forced dichotomy. I mean, obviously at this point I'm dealing with some wacko, so I'm just like, let's screw with it. So I say, okay, if I gotta pick one, I'll go with insult, because fuck you, if you're gonna make me pick. And he says, that makes a lot more sense. I didn't think you were interested in the truth. By this point, I'm thinking I'm dealing with someone who's narcissistic. If this is somebody I met in person, it would be somebody I surgically removed from myself as quickly as possible. But I make videos on intellectual self-defense because I just love talking about it and I love showing it to people and teaching people about it, and I just want to show this guy and teach this guy and give him one more chance, and maybe I could shake him out of it and be like, look, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing. If you stop, we can have a productive conversation. I said, yeah, man. The truth is, because he used the word truth, if I have to pick between insult me and insult you, which is literally what he just wrote, I choose insult you. You provided the options. I'm just choosing. May God strike me for my insubordination. The words from your own mouth should wake you up. But will they? Philosophically speaking, a wise person could not care less about personal insults if indeed they seek truth. In your case, you care more about being insulted by someone you will probably never meet than get the truth. When your ego is secondary to your desire for wisdom, you will become wise while being daily insulted. I think this guy's describing to me his day-to-day life. Why not try adopting a higher level of confidence in your own intuition rather than protecting your own ignorance? Money is not what the intellectuals say it is. They are as stupefied as you are, but on a higher level. The problem arises when the so-called intellectuals are questioned by someone that isn't brainwashed. This power and control issue has been held intact from before recorded history, as indicated in the Hindu Sanskrit and Sumerian cuneiform writings, which I'm sure you're fluent in both, which predate the Bible in all known history. You should probably go back to sleep and take the blue pill, as it is very uncomfortable living in a world that is upside down. Regards, John. Wow. Okay, so that guy had a little bit more going on than just the forced dichotomy. But within all that crap, he did have a very, very good, clear, obvious, stupid example of a forced dichotomy, which is, you, sir, either insult me, or you are incapable of critical thinking. Which one is it? Well, guy that I've never met before on the internet, I guess it's insult you. That's all I got for this video. I hope you could take this information and use it to help you identify when you're in the middle of a fake discussion and you don't fall for that, oh, let's have a debate about the facts trap. And if you did find it useful or interesting, please give me a like, give me a share. Heck, give me a stupid comment that I could use for more of these videos in the future. It really helps me out, and we'll see you next time.